How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
You're listening to What She Said with me, Candace Sampson, and this is your weekly reminder to take up big space in life, laugh loudly, absorb new knowledge, and continue to grow and expand. What She Said is your space for the big conversations that matter and the little joys that make life sweeter. This is where empowerment meets self-care and mansplaining has no seat at the table. So grab a coffee, get comfy, and let's jump into it because life's too short not to embrace the good stuff while we tackle the tough stuff.
I always hope that people can read this and think, I'm smarter than I thought. I can figure this stuff out. And I really hope that they can start to get engaged in the climate science and the climate conversation and to get in there a more technical way because they're smart enough. They can do it. And we all should be talking about this, I feel, unfortunately. We should be thinking about all of these things. And I also want them to think about how they can be helpful, because I think that a lot of people have so much more to offer than they have maybe been led to believe.
That's Alexis von Konigslow, and she's the author behind the literary thriller The Exclusion Zone. With degrees in mathematical physics and creative writing, Alexis brings a rare blend of rigor and imagination to her work. Her novel explores the science of fear, the fallout, literal and figurative, of the Chernobyl disaster, and the quiet resilience of women in science who've long been underestimated. The Exclusion Zone is eerie, thought-provoking, and timely. And in this conversation, we get into everything from ghost stories to gender bias in STEM to why so many women think they're bad at math. Spoiler, they're not. Let's hear what she said. Alexis, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I think this is a fascinating topic, not just the book, obviously, but also just all of the science in and around it. So let's start with the science of fear. What drew you to fear as a subject of study, both scientifically and creatively?
I started this book by thinking about the physics of it. I loved the physics and I was very drawn to not just the physics, but the disaster. And every time I read about it, I would get tingles. I would feel afraid, but that fear was motivating. And that made me think more and more about the use of fear. People talk about it as something to avoid. And it's true. We shouldn't feel it all the time, but there is something so fun about experiencing it sometimes. And there's something so motivating about having these fear reactions. So I thought about that a bit more. And that was sort of an entry into the character that I ended up writing.
And women in particular, I mean, are really drawn to fear, aren't we? When you think about it, like all those shows and podcasts like True Crime, women are the primary consumers of that sort of thing.
Oh, I didn't know that, but that makes sense. I feel that.
So how did your background in mathematical physics I just find this fascinating, by the way. Sorry. That you have a background in mathematical physics and you're writing this fiction novel as well. So how did your background in physics inform the research or themes in the novel?
When I was studying physics, I love physics and I love math, and there's a lot of storytelling involved in it. It's hard to describe how that happens, but there is, in mathematical proofs, there's a story that you're telling, and it's really elegant and beautiful. I also love reading, and so I've always sort of thought about ways to merge those two things. Another thing that happened, though, was when I was studying math and physics, I put myself through university mainly by tutoring people, and often by tutoring little girls. And I would always sit down the first time with the girls and they would tell me, I'm not good at math. I can't do this. I'm not good at science. This is not for me. And I would always say, maybe, let's see. And by week 3, they'd discover that they actually were very good at it. So we get turned off of math, not just women, but mainly women. We get turned off of math very early and for sort of silly reasons that have nothing to do with math. And a lot of people are so much better at it than they think. So I've always been drawn to proving to people that they're much better at this than they think they are. And so that is one of the things I like to do in my books. I like to have math and physics in there. And if you can follow the math and the physics in these books, and you absolutely can, plus or minus, that means that you can do it. You can absolutely go back and become mathematical geniuses in your real life as well.
I think I could really challenge you on that. I think I could frustrate you. I remember making my dad cry at the kitchen table teaching me math. But I think I'm 55. I think I was probably very much a victim of that mentality back then, that girls weren't good at math and just, don't worry, pursue the softer things. That was sort of the mentality in that generation.
It was. And a lot of people get turned off, not really in the math section. They get turned off in the memorization section. So if you've convinced yourself that you're not super good at it, you were probably trying to memorize timetables and do things like that.
Yep.
But that's just memorization. That's not math. It gets so interesting later on, but people have already convinced themselves, I can't do this. So they've turned it off in a way. I bet you're really good at it. You're very logical, and you're able to process some really deep and important topics. I bet you could surprise yourself.
But nobody would be more surprised. So let's talk about Chernobyl for a bit. So why choose Chernobyl and its exclusion zone as your backdrop for the story?
This was a strange thing. I was on the bus going to work one day, and I was reading an article about the sarcophagus that surrounds the exclusion zone and how it was sort of falling apart. And in the article, somebody said that they saw birds flying out of it. So there were birds living in it. And I was going to work, and then I worked that day, and I came home, and I kept thinking about it. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I started reading about it and reading more and more and more about it. And it's just such a spooky atmosphere and such a scary place that people aren't allowed to go. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I started researching more and more. And then I started thinking about what could happen there. So I read this article, and it inspired me to do work. And then I started thinking about what stories could be told in such a spooky place.
So what kind of research did you do then into the real life zone and its history? Were you able to visit the site, or did you watch videos of people who have visited?
I wasn't actually able to go. I watched a lot of videos. I read a lot of bystander accounts. I read as much as I could find. And I looked for, there are books with photos taken at the time, and there are photos that are being published now. And I couldn't stop looking at them. It is so spooky. And I think there's something very fun about a place where you're told you can't go there.
So how does your protagonist's experience reflect what women in science face today?
I did study science, and it was, I think, maybe more when I was studying, hopefully more than now. It was tricky to be a woman in science. I did have professors who would answer my lab partner's questions and not mine, and make eye contact with anyone else, but not me. There weren't very many of us at the time. I think there are more now. I think it's getting better, but I wanted to reflect how tricky it can be to maneuver around all of these ideas that women aren't as good, or women's science is a different kind of science, or women should maybe not be in this field. I wanted to reflect that, and I wanted people to understand what it can feel like.
So I'm curious though, we are seeing sort of this backlash against women in a lot of spaces. Do you think the perception of women in STEM is changing fast enough, or do you think it's experiencing the same sort of backslide that we're seeing in a lot of other areas?
I hope that the doors are being opened. I hope so. I also get a bit worried that now that science is sort of more open to women, people are saying, well, I never wanted to be there to begin with. So there's a big backlash against science itself, I feel. There's a backlash against vaccines, against all sorts of things. And I hope that's not because there are people in there that weren't in there before.
Let's hope so. But it is so hard anymore to figure out what the reason would be. I mean, it can only be misogyny sometimes where women are shut out of these spaces.
This episode is brought to you by PetSmart. Stop by for Yappy Hour with your pet at PetSmart. Save $5 on walk-in grooming services like nail trims, ear cleaning, brushing, and more. No appointment needed every weekday from 2 to 6 p.m. And while you're there, Yappy Hour includes exclusive in-store deals, like 25% off pet toys. Visit services.petsmart.com/grooming to learn more.
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
The book touches on who controls scientific funding and how findings are shaped. Was that inspired by real-world concerns for you?
It is. I think I'm not alone in being very concerned about what's going on with the environment and how we're talking about it and how we're planning for it, but really how we're talking about it and what findings are reported on and how we're reporting on them. And I'm concerned about what makes it into the common conversation. So I read all of the journals and things, and I try to talk to other people about how dangerous this moment is. They like to talk about how it's going to be a beautiful summer, which is hopefully will be, but maybe all of this heat is not a great thing. So I'm a bit concerned about what findings we're looking for and what findings we're allowed to enter into the conversation.
So without spoilers, let's talk about the story a bit. How much of the book should readers expect to be real, I'm putting this in quotes, versus psychological or spiritual?
I made the whole thing up. I made up a research center. I thought it would be super fun to imagine that there's a research center very close to the exclusion zone. There are definitely research trips that go there, and there are scientists who go there and who do study the flora and the fauna. But I made up the research center and I made up the people. And with this science, I did try to explain a little bit of what I understand of the science of climate change and things like that, but I did change timelines quite a bit. What was being discussed and when, just because I wanted to write about a certain specific period. And I did want to talk about what we know about climate change and the energy that's trapped in the atmosphere and the way the soil is changing. But I did change what was being discussed and when.
There's a little bit of a supernatural element, though, as well, weaved into this, right?
There is, absolutely. And that, of course, I made that up as well.
As a scientist, do you believe in the supernatural? I mean, my partner is a scientist as well. We have these conversations where, he's a big believer in science, but he believes in God. And whereas I am an atheist, I don't. We have these really robust conversations. So I'm always interested by people who are in science who also believe in sort of what can't be explained.
I don't know what I believe. That is an amazing question. I absolutely don't know what I believe. I love the idea of ghosts. So I love to read scientific journals, and I also love to read ghost stories. Those are my two favorite things. And I'm willing to be challenged, and I'm willing to rethink my ideas. And I don't really know. I would love to believe in ghosts and the supernatural, and religion is a whole question. I don't know what I believe there. I like to think about those things. I don't know what I believe, though.
So you've written both literary fiction and thrillers. How do you balance literary language with suspenseful pacing?
My strategy is I need to be willing to throw things out, and that's tricky to do. But I try to keep the pace going, and I have a document of things that I will not include in the novel, but not throw away quite yet. And so that helps me, I think.
So what was the hardest scene then to write in this book for you?
Not to give too much away, this book is about a woman who was very focused on her marriage and then goes through a really difficult patch. And in that difficult patch goes to the exclusion zone and comes into her own. And it's a novel about her fighting over Skype with her husband and then sort of coming together at the end. So the transition between her being so angry and her being unable to come into her own because of the marriage, and then deciding that she can maybe be with someone and be herself was, I thought, very tricky to write. So that transition between the anger and the love and the acceptance was hard to get to. And so I found those scenes where she was forgiving her husband, forgiving herself, and finding a way to be in a relationship to be more solidly herself was tricky. Maybe I find that tricky in real life as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a lot of authors on the show, and I'm fascinated by how much of their own real life experiences get pulled into their fiction novels. Is there a lot of you in this book, or even mirrored in your protagonist a little bit?
Maybe definitely the things that I think about. I struggle a lot with how to really focus and be present in relationships, but also to be present with myself, and how to focus on how to keep a family running while getting your own work done as well. So I think that was in there. I didn't even notice that until you asked me that question.
Well, that's good. I'm glad I've got you thinking about it now. So what do you hope women, especially those in underrepresented fields, take away from The Exclusion Zone?
I always hope that people can read this and think, I'm smarter than I thought. I can figure this stuff out. And I really hope that they can start to get engaged in the climate science and the climate conversation, and to get in there in a more technical way, because they're smart enough. They can do it. And we all should be talking about this, I feel. Unfortunately, we should be thinking about all of these things. And I also want them to think about how they can be helpful, because I think that a lot of people have so much more to offer than they have maybe been led to believe. If you read this book and you get inspired to read further about technical things, and if you can think about how you can talk about technical things, that would make me so happy. And that is something that I would love to get out of this.
And I love that you said find a way to be helpful, because I think right now when it comes to the climate in particular, most of us feel helpless. What can we do? We're composting, we're recycling, we're, trying to do everything we can in our power. We're buying less, we're, all of these things. And we still feel like we're just not doing enough. So I love that you are looking to empower people to find ways to be more helpful. I think that is key right now, instead of feeling helpless and sort of throwing up your arms and saying, well, there's nothing I can do. So what's next for you? Any follow-up stories or other sort of genre-bending project in the works?
I'm juggling a few different novels that sort of take this and run with it in different directions. So I am writing, I'm trying to write a literary novel that is also a horror novel. So I'm very excited about that, and I've been working on that.
Let's do a little bit of a rapid fire. 3 questions to sort of wrap up this podcast. What's the scariest book you've ever read?
I've read a lot of really, really scary books, and a lot of them have stayed with me for a very long time. I just read Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, and I couldn't sleep one night. So, but
okay. No,
that's just
note to me not to read that book. I am big ticket. So if it's keeping you awake at night and you write these kinds of books, that's a scary book.
It was terrifying.
Who is your favorite female scientist? And this can be real or fictional.
I'm going to talk about 2. I think one real, there's a science communicator. She's a brilliant scientist, but she's also an amazing communicator, and she communicates to all levels of expertise. She makes videos for children, and she talks to other scientists. Her name is Raven Baxter, of all people. I adore her. She is absolutely wonderful. I've never met her, but I love what she does. And I also love the scientist in Anne Patchett's State of Wonder. She is not a real scientist. She is not studying real science, but I've read State of Wonder a million times, and I can't stop thinking about that novel.
One place you would never want to spend a night, and you can't say The Exclusion Zone because that's obviously in your book.
My brother likes to visit haunted places. And so there are a number of places that I know that you can spend a night. But there's a haunted inn just outside of Ottawa. Oh. I would never want to go there.
Oh,
never do it.
I'm in Ottawa. What's the inn?
Oh, I can't remember the name. He read about it in a book, and I've been thinking about it ever since. And I would never go there.
All right. I'm going to look it up. So I know to avoid it as well, by the way, not because I have any interest to stay in the night, just so I could just drive hours of my way around it. Alexis, thank you so much for joining me. It was a real pleasure having you here. Where can people connect with you and find the book?
The book is available through Wolsak Wynn, and I will have a website up and ready in the next couple of days. If you Google my name, hopefully you'll be able to find that.
Okay, and are you on social media at all?
I just got on Instagram, and I'm nervous, but I'm excited.
All right. Don't be nervous. Instagram is nothing to be nervous about. All right, Alexis, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much again.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to share it with someone who'd love it too. And don't forget to hit subscribe to What She Said with me, Candace Sampson, on your favorite podcast app. It's the easiest way to stay connected. Want more? Sign up for my newsletter at whatshesaidtalk.com to get all the latest updates, and let's keep the conversation going on social. You can find What She Said on Facebook and Instagram, and you'll find me on Threads, TikTok, and Blue Sky at Candace Said. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.
Hi, it's Matt. I'm one of the producers here on Writing Class Radio. Andrea and Allison have the summer off, but they have left behind a collection of stories with a sticky note on them called Summer Echoes, stories worth hearing again. These are the episodes that stuck with us, made us laugh, cry, or look at the world a little differently. Whether you're hearing them for the first time or coming back for another listen, these stories still have something to say. So hit play, lean in, and let the stories move you all over again. Summer Echoes on Writing Class Radio, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and at writingclassradio.com.
Hey y'all, it's Allison Cullen, your host of the You Do Woo podcast. If you can't handle small talk, but instead prefer going deep right away, you are in the right place. Here at You Do Woo, we explore all aspects of your soul's evolution, relationships, motherhood and marriage, human design, and other spiritual sciences, as well as practical application of these tools so that we can all become a person that we are truly proud of on a daily basis. Keep in mind, I don't have my ducks in a row or my shit together, and neither does anyone else that's a human on Earth School right now. But I am here to walk through it along with you and talk about the things that truly matter.
Join Allison Cullen for You Do Woo on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and at youdowoo.com.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.